What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Halving Report podcast with myself, your host, Brad Mines. The next halving will occur at block 840,000, as there are roughly 84,000 blocks left until the next Bitcoin halving. The price of Bitcoin is at a mere 19.5 thousand US dollars on September 28th, 2022. Surprise, surprise, more sideways action in the crypto and greater markets. Many are fearful, many are scared, and a few are trying to capitalize by dollar cost averaging at these low prices. Today, we get to speak to a founder of a blockchain-based gaming platform, Haste Arcade, Joe Pinto. Joe was a former professional baseball player, a co-founder of BarPay, and has been in the space since 2017. Before we get to today's show, shout out to our partner at BitBuy. If you are Canadian and you haven't already, go to bitbuy.ca/halving for a free $20 in Canadian fiat after depositing your first $250, which can be used to purchase many different types of cryptocurrencies so quick and easily at bitbuy.ca/halving. Everybody, welcome Joe Pinto to the show. All right, Joe, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for coming on to the Halving Report podcast.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Brad.
Yeah, so if you don't mind just giving us a quick introduction to who you are, Joe, and how you came to work in the crazy world of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think my story is pretty crazy too, but basically my name's Joe Pinto. I'm one of the co-founders of Haste and what we call the Haste Arcade, which is an arcade that utilizes Bitcoin blockchain micropayments to actually reward gamers for making leaderboards in the game. So the example we typically give, you go to an arcade, you put 25 cents in the Pac-Man machine, you play the game. If you get on that leaderboard, typically you would just be able to leave your initials, and that's really the only benefit you get. But with us, because of blockchain, we can actually now, say you get on one of our leaderboards, anyone that plays after you for as long as you're on that leaderboard, and these boards can be 100 up to, potentially even 1,000 people long, you're actually going to get a fraction of their payment. So a fraction of a quarter, right? So it might not even be a full cent, but that's part of the beauty of Bitcoin and blockchain, and really what drew me to it. So my other background is I was actually a professional baseball player after college. I got drafted by the Chicago White Sox, which is where I met my business partner, Dan Wagner. He was also on the team with me, especially in AA Birmingham. And we both just kind of had like the same vision of what we wanted to do after baseball. We didn't want to stay in the game. We didn't want to work for other people. Excuse me, I'll just sneeze. We basically both felt like, there was a lot more to be done outside of the baseball world. And we started our first company, BarPay, which really came from our own frustrations, because in the minor leagues, you're usually finishing a game late. You have 45 minutes to an hour before curfew hits, and you got to get back to the hotel. And if you don't make it in time, you either get fined or you miss the next game, you don't get to play. And what we found was late at night, the only places open are these bars and restaurants that, they're typically the college type venues where it's really hard to get a drink. It takes 10 minutes to close out. And after enough of those experiences, we're just like, man, there has to be a better way to do this. So anyways, our careers both ended around the same time in 2014. We decided to pursue this idea we had where, let's build an app, because there was an app for everything those days where you could, order and pay for your drinks and your food. But through that learning process, we learned about credit card processing rates. And that's kind of what got us down the whole Bitcoin rabbit hole, with the initial promise of, peer-to-peer cash, where a Bitcoin transaction is significantly cheaper than a, traditional credit card transaction. And it's also a lot faster. So that got us to be actually in the space, at least paying attention to what Bitcoin was, learning about it. This was kind of right before Ethereum even came out. And we just followed the whole thing, since then. We were part of, I don't know if did you ever hear about BitConnect in 2017, the collapse of BitConnect?
Dude, I am a victim of BitConnect.
Same. All right. So
okay.
What's victim? I hear they're going after those guys. I think they might get them, but yeah. So, through stuff like that, we just kept paying attention, kept seeing, the different coins that would come out, the different ICOs and whatnot. And we really wanted to focus on the original fundamentals of what we thought made Bitcoin cool and compelling to us. It wasn't as much about investing as it was like, wow, this technology can do things that current payment methods can't. That was very interesting to us. So that's kind of what got us to this whole Haste Arcade.
Sweet, man. So in between your BarPay story and then coming into the introduction to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, what was your first introduction? so it wasn't quite Bitcoin. It was more about like the trends that were going on and, what blockchain could do for other use cases other than money.
Yeah, I remember reading the white paper and just like the title, peer-to-peer electronic cash. And that didn't really make sense to me at the time. Like I thought everything already was kind of peer-to-peer, but that was also, like I said, the same time we were learning about these credit card rates and how, you have this thing called interchange fees that the credit card companies and the banks are charging on every transaction. And it's expensive if you're selling, a $5 or a $10 good, like in the bar and restaurants, you buy a beer, at least back then you could get one for like $5. Now they're probably closer to like 10, but yeah, you're paying a minimum of usually on a digital payment, 2.9% plus like a fixed 30 cents. So, on a $10 transaction, that's a lot of your margin taken out right there just from the credit card rates. So, the whole Bitcoin thing at the time, like I'll admit, like when we first started looking at it, it was mostly because we were just trading it on a daily basis, really small amounts. Like neither of us had any money. You don't make money in the minor leagues very much. But we had just found out about like Robinhood, who was doing interest-free trades and commission-free trades, but you can only do it right during normal stock hours. And then all of a sudden, this thing Bitcoin is trading 24/7, and it's like, oh wow, this is really cool. So that got us, in the rabbit hole, I guess you will. And then when we actually started learning about it and paying attention to like, wow, like there's some serious things that this could disrupt. There's really no turning back after that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you kind of go crypto, you don't really go back, right? It's
Yeah.
Unless, I mean, some people, maybe if you get it at the top, I'm sure there's some people that get that turned off, but we're in a bear market. So, I mean, anyone that's around right now, we can imagine is going to be around for the long haul. I'm here for the long haul. I can see your dedication and your team. You guys are definitely here for good. You mentioned, your example for Haste Arcade was Pac-Man, but what are some of your more popular games, or what range of games do you guys have?
Yeah, so we have 15 games in the arcade now. And one of the things we wanted to do, like Dan and I, the original Haste game that we put out, neither of us are game developers. Dan had just recently started programming, so it was just like a very basic thing. And we've kind of continued that trend. All of our games in the arcade at this point are hyper casual. So these are games that are going to take, on average, anywhere from 5 seconds to maybe a minute to actually play the game. They're not very complex. But with that, like we've been open and transparent and just said like, look, we're not game devs, but we've built a really cool like software developer kit so that third-party game developers can actually take our leaderboard payout structure, which we call instant leaderboard payouts, and they can plug that into their games if they think it's something that, would be attractive to them for obvious reasons of like they're making revenue instantly now on the very first transaction, as opposed to like typical casual games. You got to build up a huge user base and then start running ads, which nobody likes. So obviously with blockchain, these guys can monetize immediately if they're using our SDK. And then on the other side for the gamers, there's like an additional incentive to play these games and get good at these games. If you're good, you're going to actually generate some income from that. So it gives you like another reason to actually play the game. And so the arcade now has 15 games. We actually just released our newest one yesterday, called Monster Bombs, which is just a home run derby game, kind of tapping into me and Dan's background. It was our first sports game, so we were like, of course we should do a baseball one. But something that was really cool about that, and to my knowledge, I think we're the first ones that have ever done this, is we had an NFT sale leading up to this game where we actually have like physical Haste Arcade jerseys. And so we sold these Haste Arcade jerseys, and if you bought one, you got a digital copy of it, the form of an NFT for that jersey that you could then equip on your player in the game. So the player has like his generic stuff, but now if you actually, buy one of these jerseys in the real world, you get this digital copy. And I think that's something that, sports franchises a couple of years from now, I feel like everyone should be doing that. Anything you buy from the team store, you should be able to use in the quote unquote metaverse or in Web3.
You guys integrated with BSV, if I'm not mistaken. And, why did you guys choose BSV for your for integrating BSV with your game?
Yeah, it kind of goes into like just, we were keeping up with Bitcoin when it forked into Bitcoin Cash. And you're gonna laugh, everyone always laughs, but I had my BTC, and then the fork happens. Obviously you've got Segwit introduced around that time, a little bit earlier. But basically the promise of Bitcoin Cash, BCH, was that the BTC developers wanted to basically take this peer-to-peer cash that I was personally interested in, and the narrative kind of changed. Now it's like a store of gold. It's an asset that you just hold on to, and I didn't see a whole lot of utility in that at the time. So it forks into Bitcoin Cash. I sold all my BTC into BCH thinking like, oh, well, everyone's going to do that, right? Like, here's the thing I can still send for a fraction of a cent. The fees on BTC at this point, especially because it was hitting like, $20,000. It was expensive to send it all of a sudden, and it took a long time. So it was like, well, this isn't really what I was looking for my original like business use case. I feel like the rest of the world is going to, kind of see it the same way. And clearly they didn't. So anyways, it forks into Bitcoin Cash. I have a bunch of Bitcoin Cash now. And then within that community of developers, there's another disagreement in terms of like the Bitcoin Cash people are fairly anarchist. They want to live on like Bitcoin Island and not really, give any mind to law or regulations. And I'm not opposed to that. Personally, I'm probably in line with a lot of what they think. But at the same time, when you're talking about global adoption of a technology, it just seemed to me like you're going to have to play nice with regulators at some point, whether you like it or not. You're going to have to, at least bend the knee a little bit. And so there was a group of developers within Bitcoin Cash that decided to fork off and create Bitcoin SV, Satoshi Vision, which basically, their whole thing was, we want fast, cheap transactions, and we want this to actually scale to the points where governments and large enterprise companies and banks would even be interested in using it. So to me, it seemed like, that's the one that had the chance for like global adoption in terms of a peer-to-peer cash. So I still see like BTC obviously is the top dog right now. BCH, I'm not sure what they're going to be able to do, but the reason we chose BSV was just because like it's the only protocol right now, at least, that can facilitate our leaderboard payouts, right? So on BTC, the fees would be too high and the transaction times would be too low to take a 25-cent gameplay, split it 100 ways, and have it instantly hitting your wallet. So that's really the only reason. There is some like other politics behind these different forks. We tried not to really pay attention to that. Like, we've looked at other chains. Like, I'm not opposed to Solana. I'm not opposed to Polygon. But it's just that, again, when we look at the actual protocol and what we need for the arcade to work, as of right now, BSV is the only chain that can actually facilitate those leaderboard payouts.
Yeah, and if I can relate a bit, like when I came into the space in 2017, the block size wars were well underway, and within the last few months, I read the book, The Block Size Wars, and it kind of gave me a better understanding of what was going on there. Like I didn't really know what the forks were at the time, and so I would dump everything else and just put it into. I thought, I'm like, oh, here's free money. I'm just gonna dump this, whatever it is, put it into my Bitcoin. But like I said, I was involved in a whole bunch of stuff back then. So hindsight's always 2020. And Bitcoin Cash too. Like I was holding, I think I still have some Bitcoin Cash, not a whole lot. And you're right. Like it does work. Like it's very quick. It's more for the business side. And like they said, the block size war kind of showed how there was, two camps of people, people more business minded. Then you have like the coders, or the nerds that are more about slow progression, money for the world. Let's take this so cautionary that we don't want to change anything until everything's so perfect, right? But other chains are doing other things. It's like competing religions, right? So I'm not opposed to any other innovation in the space either, but I'm just financially conservative, stick to my blue chip cryptos when it comes to the majority of my investment, and then everything else is a lot of fun, and I don't want to shun away at that, and I don't want to just sit back and watch all my friends have the fun. So I like learning about this stuff, and I like learning about what's trending.
Isn't that fun? I feel like within the crypto community, there's so much like unnecessary like hatred towards each other, when the truth is like, I hope every one of these chains goes to infinity compared to the dollar. And I think they all will, because at some point every fiat through the history of time has collapsed. So like, just theoretically speaking, every coin will go to like infinity compared to the dollar, whether that's in 5 years, 10 years, 1,000 years, whatever it is. But it's like, why is it there's just so much animosity? I've never really understood that about the space and the whole big blocker, small blocker mentality. It's just like, dude, like, do your thing, enjoy it, I'll do mine, like whatever.
Oh, for sure. I totally agree with that. And I think even yours is like, BSV to me seems even more controversial than the average altcoin because of, all the lawsuits around who Satoshi is and whatnot.
He gets a lot of attention.
And you know what? He's kind of out of my realm. Like, I don't really see a whole lot about Craig Wright right now anyways, like in and out a little bit. There's certain people I follow, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. Like you said, all crypto coins theoretically should go up against the dollar.
Right.
I at some point though, I started saying, I gotta measure against Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin's gonna be money for the world, then I gotta measure what my altcoins are gonna do against Bitcoin, because
Yep.
then I would have less Bitcoin at the end of the day. But like I said, everyone makes their own bed. What are some of the challenges you guys have at Haste Arcade?
I think it ties into what we were just talking about. It's that, Bitcoin SV is not really a mainstream coin. And even though it's a fork of Bitcoin Cash, I would say not a lot of people know about it. It's not easy to get access to. It's not listed on most of the exchanges because of, the whole Craig thing. And Craig's gone out of his way to basically call these exchanges out, which, why would you do that? I don't know. He has his reasons, and he is, the character that he is. But at the same time, that hurts adoption for us on one aspect. But at the same time, I think it's still going to be a while before blockchain is truly adopted. So we're still at the very infancy of this. And I think that regardless of what chain we were on, we probably see similar, issues. Like Ethereum still has problems, right? Like they just did their whole merge. The big companies on there, like the Axie Infinities, when they reach a certain point of scale, they tend to collapse. It's just like, if you're having too much volume, it collapses. If you don't have enough volume, it collapses. It's like there isn't a happy median yet, just because we're so early in the adoption of all this technology, in my opinion.
And so we've mentioned Craig Wright a couple of times. Where we stand? Where does he stand with his lawsuits and his claims?
Yeah, I've actually met Craig on a handful of occasions for like Bitcoin SV type events, and basically he's been in a ton of lawsuits. There's a ton that are still ongoing, or a ton that are coming up. The most recent one that was finished, which was a pretty big deal. He was in a civil suit with a guy named Ira Kleiman, who was the brother of the since deceased Dave Kleiman, who basically helped Craig in Craig's story create Bitcoin. And he was like, he was like the friend that he would always send, that Craig would always send, his white papers or his ideas to, and they'd kind of like bounce them off each other. And then Craig would go and actually like develop it, send it again, blah, blah. This is how Craig describes it. Okay. So Ira Kleiman finds out that his brother was part of, or allegedly part of, this thing called Bitcoin. And this was around 2014, 2015. I could be getting that date wrong. But basically, starts then learning about Craig Wright and takes him to court saying, hey, my brother was the co-creator of Bitcoin. You owe me half of this, the 1.1 million Bitcoins that Satoshi has, or that are in the original, Bitcoin addresses that have never really moved. So he's saying, Craig, you owe me, half of these, which Bitcoin at the time was $60,000, it was a $60 billion lawsuit going on. Very few mainstream publications picked it up, even though it was, it still is the largest civil lawsuit of all time. And in essence, it depends on what side of the story you're paying attention to. Craig's side will spin it as if they won. Ira's side will spin it as if they won. But basically what ended up happening is this was in a federal court in Florida, an estate called W&K Enterprises. It's like WK Enterprises, WK Inc. I forget what the actual exact, denomination is, or whatever that's called. But basically it stood for Wright and Kleiman. So an establishment that Craig and Dave Kleiman had set up back in the day. Craig owed WK Enterprises $100 million. That was what the verdict was. That was basically what the jury said. So Ira Kleiman was suing for roughly $30 billion. W&K wins $100 million. And the kicker to me is that Craig and his, I don't know if it's his ex-wife or current wife, but they actually own 70% of W&K Enterprises. So basically Craig had to pay $70 million to himself in this W&K thing. So Ira didn't get the 30 billion he was going for. He got roughly, or the Kleiman side of it got roughly 30 million. So like, who won? That's the argument. Ira might say like, oh, well, Craig had to pay $100 million to W&K. Craig would say, well, yeah, but you were suing me for 30 billion. So you got, a fraction of that, a very small fraction of which I actually own the majority of it anyways. So that lawsuit was, that was interesting. I did see Craig that week because I was there for a totally separate event in Florida, but just happened to see him that week, and really actually got to see like the human side of him also. He was pretty distraught that the case had gone like several weeks longer than it was supposed to. His son at the time was from Australia, had been in London for like 2 or 3 weeks. And Craig actually missed seeing his son. And that would have been the first time he'd been able to be with his whole family since COVID started, because Australia had some really, strict rules on leaving the country. So he actually was quite human that weekend and kind of like broke down, was pretty distraught about not being able to be with his family. But anyways, that was like the last major case that he was in. He's actually been in one, and I think the closing statements are actually today in Norway against a Twitter guy named Hodlnaut, who his real name is like Granith something. But basically, there again, pretty much arguing in court. This guy Hodlnaut called Craig a fraud. Craig says fraud's a legal term, like, you have to prove this in court if you're going to call me a fraud. Otherwise, you have to issue me a public apology. And so that verdict should come out, I think, at some point next week, based on what they're not really even like suing for much over there, though. It's more so like kind of like bragging rights, like I was right, you were wrong type of stuff. So again, I'm not an expert on the court cases. I listen to them at a high level, but for me, again, I'm going to take it back to like the utility of BSV. Whether Craig is Satoshi or not doesn't really affect like what we're doing in the arcade and what we're using BSV for. So we know he's a controversial figure, but we kind of just leave it at that, and we try to focus on what we can build.
In that case with Hodlnaut, that's been going on for a couple of years, hasn't it? I remember seeing all the Twitter beef like years ago, I feel like.
Yeah, and it just kept getting pushed back, and it really only started either last week or the week before that. So I think they've been in court now for like 7 or 8 days, and I heard today was like the final closing statements. I've kept up a little bit with it, and again, it's mostly just, he said this, he said that. Here's the evidence that supports that, but then the other side's like, well, that evidence isn't right because of these reasons, and it just goes back and forth, and it's a lot of legal stuff that's kind of over my head, so I try not to have too strong of an opinion. If Craig was Satoshi, do I think that would help BSV? I don't know, actually. I think his reputation is kind of what it is already, and even if, tomorrow he comes out and signs like what most people want him to do, I don't know if the opinion of him would change in general with the broader community. So again, like I just try to, you keep an ear to it. It's interesting stuff in general, like who is Satoshi, I think is a really cool story. But again, in terms of what we're building, like we're just focused on the tech and the protocol of BSV.
Yeah. And I mean, so a while back I did have Roger Ver on the podcast, and obviously very controversial, as the main proponent of Bitcoin Cash.
Yep.
And he said something on my podcast that back in the day it was just him and Andreas Antonopoulos who were promoting Bitcoin, and he says when the block, he was talking about the block size wars, and when Bitcoin Cash came out, he thinks that siding with Bitcoin was just the more popular position, and he thinks Andreas kind of took an easy way out by just sticking with Bitcoin because it's the biggest religion of all these competing religions, right? And you're going to have more support in that category of cryptocurrency. But there's so much going on. What's your take on ETH 2.0, the Ethereum merge, the 99.9% emission reduction? I'm not sure if that number is 99.9 or 99.5 or whatever it is. Proof of stake. What are your thoughts around that?
I'm not a huge fan of proof of stake blockchains. I think that fundamentally they, perpetuate the rich getting richer. And, the way that a proof of stake block is solved versus a proof of work, it concerns me, maybe not today, but 10 years down the road, when the person that has had the most Ethereum to stake for 10 years just continues to increase the gap between them and the next guy just because of how the proof of stake model works. I'm not a big fan. And I also, this is a pro BSV thing. I'm not a believer either in the sentiment that proof of work is not energy efficient. I actually think that it encourages entrepreneurs to continue to make more energy efficient systems. And then when you actually look at the number of transactions, and again, this is pro BSV, this stuff can be found on BitInfo charts. The number of transactions that BSV does in a day, with like 0.1% of all the hash rate that's out there in the entire world, it's like last week it was 92% of all the transactions across all blockchains. It was something like 35 million transactions in one day on BSV with 0.1% of the hash, compared to like 4 or 5 million transactions on every other chain combined. So when you talk about BTC, I understand the argument there where it's like, hey, they're processing 4 to 7 transactions per second, using all this hash, using all this energy. Okay, that can be argued that that's inefficient. But if you're processing millions and millions and millions of transactions on a proof of work network where the amount of hash and energy that it requires to actually mine those transactions is less than what Ethereum is, like, I don't know, it seems like that argument kind of collapses to me. So I think the reason they're actually doing it is, number one, like Ethereum doesn't scale as a proof of work blockchain. And number two, I think that the proof of stake model is attractive to blockchains that have a central figure. If you think about Solana, Ethereum, they all have people that are basically the face of that token, and they have the majority of those tokens. So in terms of staking, they're going to be the ones that are able to stake the most, which means they're going to have the best opportunity to mine the next block and get the next reward. So to me, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that system, and I don't think that it solves the core problems with Ethereum. I don't think they're going to be able to do more transactions than they were able to do, before they made the merge. So, to me, again, it just comes down to utility. I think that the amount of transactions you can do, if you're not, the blue chip digital gold asset that BTC is, you got to find something else that makes you valuable, right? And I think, to me, that's going to be transactions and utility.
Where do you see us in the current market cycle? Do you think the BTC halving will dictate the rest of the market for the foreseeable future?
I go back and forth on that. I think that in the past, yes. I think moving forward, it seems to me like both the retail and the enterprise investors, the Wall Street investors and whatnot, I think the time for the fast money is probably over. And I think that, just looking at something and saying like, oh, every time there's been a halving, the coin pumps after, I think people are going to be looking for more fundamentals now than that. So I'm not sure. And to be honest, like, I'm one of the spend and replace type people. So the price fluctuations don't really affect me. So I don't care if the price goes up or down. Like, when I'm spending $10, I'm replacing it, right? And that way, like I said, I avoid the price fluctuation. So I think what's going to happen with the next halving, though, from an economical standpoint, and again, this is why I'm huge on transactions, as that halving gets less and less, like, the price matters more and more on the blockchains where there aren't a lot of transactions happening. Because if the block reward isn't, recouping the cost of what it's costing these miners to spend all this money on energy, they're going to stop mining the chain. So when you have a limited number of transactions and the price of the coin is not high enough to actually, pay back what it cost me to run my mining machine, I'm just going to turn my machine off, or I'm going to turn it to a different chain. So I think that, with the next halving, it'll be interesting to see how these chains react to that, and basically, like, is BTC close with the Lightning Network? Like, are they going to be able to do a lot of transactions so you can still have some type of fees as the miner if the price doesn't pump? Now, if the price pumps, obviously that's a different story. You're getting a lot more money with each block reward. But even you think, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, when the halvings have happened and we're basically where every Bitcoin has been distributed, or you're only getting, 0.1 Bitcoins for every block that's mined, at that point, and I think Satoshi talked about this in his early blog posts, at that point, the transactions are actually more important than the block reward themselves. And that's another reason why, economically, when I look at BSV and the fact that there is no cap on the block size, and they can do, right, I've seen 100,000 transactions per second, but they say in theory they can scale that up to 1 million, 1 billion, whatever. When I see that and see that, okay, the potential for transaction, fees on BSV is basically unlimited. So when the block reward goes away, these miners can still be making, who knows how much on transaction fees. Yet when you look at Bitcoin Cash, which I think their blocks are capped at 128 gigs, or maybe it's 32, or BTC with the 1 megabytes, it's just like, there's only so many transactions that you can fit in that block. And when the block reward, is 0.1 Bitcoins, the price has to be, millions of dollars for that to actually, let the miners recoup their costs if they're not making a lot on the transaction fees. So I don't know. It's pretty fascinating. I'm definitely curious. When is next halving? That's got to be coming up, what, a year, 2 years. It's
no, 2024. It's like between March and May 2024.
it's like a year and a half ish, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, so we still got some time to go. So, I'm expecting, some sideways action for some time to come. Just trying to
Yep.
be patient, and good old fashioned work, right? And
Yep.
stack along the way, man. And then next
Honest work.
time,
Yep.
next bull market, we'll both be heroes.
So we
What's
hope. Knock on wood.
what can you give us any clues? What's coming to Haste? What are you guys working on? What can we look out for in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that game that we just dropped yesterday, Monster Bombs, that seemed to have a pretty cool reception. It's a fairly simple, like all our games, they're hyper casual games where, you're just hitting home runs. But we have, a whole roadmap of more games coming out. We're going to be hosting a developer competition in November, where basically we'll have a cash prize. We're trying to decide if it's going to be about $25,000 to $50,000 in terms of, game developers that want us to make games. They'll get judged by professional game developers. They'll get judged by our team on different curriculum or criteria. And so we're hoping to get a lot more games in the arcade. And then it's just continuing to try and expand and market to the actual mainstream. And something that, I always think about is, when was the last time you were scrolling through Instagram and saw an ad for a company that was using blockchain, that wasn't an exchange or wasn't just an NFT drop? I'm talking about like, an actual company who's like, hey, we're a dating app, but we use the blockchain in this way to verify profiles. You just haven't really seen that type of development yet. So that's something that we've been doing, right? Like paid social media ads, paid Google ads, paid YouTube ads, all this stuff. And really, we've seen really, really cool and great results. I think people are open to, adventuring in cryptocurrency if it's something that they're already familiar with, like gaming. And I think a lot of people say gaming is going to be a huge entry point for blockchain adoption in general. So we're going to continue to spend money on our marketing, and we should continue to see pretty good results in terms of getting new accounts, getting people into the ecosystem, and using BSV.
Joe, do you have any favorite books or podcasts or resources that you use when you want to learn more about this space?
I listen. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Jack Liu. He's kind of an OG Bitcoin guy. He was at those original meetings, when I think they call them like the Hong Kong meetings or whatever. He hasn't had his own podcast, but he's been on a lot of different shows throughout the years. He's gone a little bit quieter now in terms of the actual like podcast. He's still pretty active on Twitter. But he's a BSV guy at this point, and he's been, I've gotten to know him a little bit. I just think that he has a tremendous understanding of, how tokens actually could really progress the world, and ways that tokens could basically create this real-time economy where every single one of us has our own token. We're generating our own value, and like we're able to basically monetize ourselves in real time. So I don't know if that's like a podcast, but it's kind of like an ideology that he talks about. Not really blockchain related, but how I built this was one that I used to listen to a lot when we had first started working on BarPay. And then in terms of books, I mean, relating to Bitcoin, I'll try to read the white paper like once every couple months, just to kind of like keep a refresher on like, hey, here's all this new stuff that's happened. How does this tie into the white paper? It's like, oh, wow, okay, there it is. Like Satoshi really freaking had this mapped out down the road. Holy cow. So there's that. But then, your classic entrepreneur books, Think and Grow Rich, The Greatest Salesman in the World, like stuff like that, kind of like self-motivating books. That's typically what I tend to gravitate towards. What about you? I'm curious if you have any you'd recommend. Obviously, the Halving Report would be a good
Halving Report, man. That's it. That's all. That's all you need.
There you go.
I got a stack of books behind me. The Book of Satoshi. So that's a compilation of all Satoshi's original writings. I'm currently reading The Seventh Property by Eric Yakes, which is kind of a history of banking and getting into the Bitcoin, which I'm not at that part yet. Bitcoin Billionaires. I really like this one about the Winklevoss twins. It's just kind of it's more of a story than diving into the nuts and bolts of Bitcoin. And I just thought it was a cool story, and how those guys got in and were working with and like how some of the OGs had these early relationships and then kind of all went their own separate ways. I don't know what else I have back here. I have the Bitcoin Standard. Have Mastering Bitcoin, but that's by Andreas Antonopoulos, and that's more for coders, and like I've delved into it a little bit, but just I haven't had enough time to go really deep into that aspect and make my own wallet and all that kind of thing. But things I do want to do in the future. I like Peter McCormick. I like Pomp. I like BitBoy. I follow all these guys. I'm on Twitter all the time. Just scrolling through Twitter and see what's going on, trying to keep up. It's a crazy, fast moving space, and I'm doing my best to just to hang on here and hang on for this wild ride. I think that's pretty much it. I think I covered most of them anyways. Have you ever been to Canada, Joe?
I was in Toronto 2 months ago for like an iGaming conference. But that was it. That was my first time there, actually.
Oh, it was your first time. Oh, okay. I was at the Jays game on Saturday, and 2 drinks cost me, I think, 29 bucks. So a big movement from those $5 days. I'm gonna open it up to you, Joe. If you have any final comments or questions or words of wisdom for my listeners. If not, just let us know where we can follow you and learn more.
Yeah, I would just say, come check out the Haste Arcade. We got a lot of hyper casual games. If you make a leaderboard, you can play these games for a penny, a dime, $1, $10, $100 if you've got, OG Bitcoin status. But it's just hastearcade.com. It's a website. You can play it from your computer, from your phone. Either way, it works fairly well. And in terms of getting in touch with me, this is interesting. Like I said, my story in crypto is a little bit different. I don't have Twitter. I'm not super active on social media, so I kind of haven't been involved in all those. Twitter can get kind of toxic from what I've heard, especially with the big blockers and the small blockers. So I try to keep my head away from that and not really focus on that stuff. But if you do want to reach out, we do have Haste Arcade on Twitter. Dan, he's usually the one who will answer in the DMs or on the posts and the retweets and all that stuff. So we're pretty good at getting back to people. You can check out our Discord, Haste Arcade, or on our website. We have an email. You can reach out, hello@hastearcade.com. I guess the only other thing I would like to say is just, in general, we already covered this, but I feel like the whole blockchain space in general needs to be nicer to each other, if that's the right way to put it. I feel like if you got here, there's a reason. You probably have a fundamental view on how money should work. And I think most of us would agree that the current fiat system is broken. I'll say broken, way beyond repair. And we need to figure out a better way to make money work. And I do think that blockchain technology and Bitcoin is a way to do that. So, if you're in this space, just remember, we might not agree on block sizes or which chain is supposed to be the one or all that, but we do agree on a fundamental thing of just hey, we've got to improve the way that money works. We've got to take the power out of banking, out of money. Money should not be pro or con. I'm sorry, for or against government or banks. Money should just be a means of transaction. That's it. There shouldn't be power in it. And I just feel like if you're in blockchain right now, if you're in crypto, you understand that at some level. So, work together, be friends, whatever cliche you want to use. That's what I would hope people could really take away.
Yeah, it's funny how much people in crypto have in common, but how much they'll argue within, like you said, about the size of blocks or these inner bolts that outsiders have no idea what you're even talking about. Yeah. But some of the best times I see the crypto community rally together is when someone from the old world, the old financial system, come out and kind of chirps crypto in general, and then you see the community. That's when you see everybody just rally together and no, screw you, right? So
Jamie Dimon in 2013 or 14 or 15, whenever it was, saying Bitcoin is a scam, and then 4 years later, oh hey, you can invest with us, Bitcoin's safe now. Dude, get out of here. Come on.
Oh, I know. I don't think I can forgive him. Kevin O'Leary used to chirp Bitcoin and stuff a lot, in crypto a lot too. And I think I've forgiven him at this point because he's doing a lot now for adoption, especially here in Canada. He's consulting, buying up some of the companies here. But yeah, no, I don't think I'll ever be able to. I just don't, Jamie Dimon, he just seems like he's just purposely misleading people. He doesn't really care. Didn't take the time to look into it. I don't know. But, Joe, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your perspective. And, thanks again for doing this.
Brad, thanks for having me on. I got one more question for you, actually, if you still got time. It's I think about this all the time, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 2 years from now, how long do you think it's going to take for adoption for things to start getting priced possibly in Bitcoin, or at least, people using Bitcoin on a daily basis. I always think, this stuff is supposed to last for 140, 160 years or whatever Satoshi originally said. If that's the truth, like, we're still in its very infancy, right? Like, we could be talking about 10, 20 more years before like it's a truly mainstream thing. What are your thoughts on that? I'd be curious.
Yeah, so kind of like you said earlier in the episode, it's the narrative changed at some point, and Bitcoin's become this store of value in which, I mostly treat that most of my crypto like that, because most of my allocation is in Bitcoin. So I don't use crypto. I don't make a transaction every single day. And as deep as I am to the average person, I'm not making transactions every day. So I still think it's going to take a long time to come. But things that you're doing is going to bring, a lot of people now are getting into the blockchain space through other means, not through just as a protest to the banks, sort of like what Bitcoin started as. And I think it's going to take a while. I think I saw a stat like 20% of Americans own a crypto or something. It seems high. It seems
definitely high. Growing. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not sure about that stat, but it seemed high at the time. And I think people are holding it right now just as an investment. But in terms of using on an everyday basis, I mean, what's Bitcoin working on Lightning? It's been working on Lightning for a long time. It's, more centralized. And, I've heard both sides of the argument there. I think we'll just see a slow, every cycle, every 4 years. I'm obviously a strong believer that the halving is going to have, be impactful every time around it comes. Maybe not as impactful as the last one, but I think every 4 years, it'll have a little bit of an impact on the markets. And, Bitcoin usually leads the way in this space, unless there's some Ethereum flippening or whatever. But, I know there's a lot of believers in that space too. We'll see how this proof of stake is going to play out in the next little while. Yeah, I think it's just going to be every cycle. There'll be a few more diehard Bitcoiners or diehard people into a certain, ETH maxis, whatever maxi, BSV maxis. There'll just be more every single cycle, and we'll gradually, 10 years from now, I would say it'll be pretty common. And right now we're also in the hurdle of legislation and clarification in each country. There's no real global agreement on what's going on there. I think 10 years before we see it. I would say.
I think I'm in a fairly similar camp on that.
I'll be here. Don't worry. Come on back. I hope to have you back, Joe. We'll touch base and see how things have progressed. And I'll be in touch about the podcast. And again, I appreciate your time, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you all for listening to the Halving Report podcast. Please like and subscribe to the show. Check out the show notes below. Share it with a friend, and we'll see you back next time.